Freemasonry and its lies. Now, one could argue as a centrist or a moderate, looking through that lens, you could argue that because of their political nature, they choose to have a indifferent or theological indifferences stance in some sects. I'll kind of get into it in a second, but I will make a case that their goal, whether expressed or not, is far more sinister and malevolent. Now, we can see here in these rites, which I kind of did a little bit more than a cursory glance research. Apparently, the Scottish rite is more prevalent in the Latin side of Freemasonry, which can have a certain continental label. And we also see the French, which were much more anti-clerical and clearly atheistic or secular in their spirit, whereas the ones we'll see more in this part of the world, in the Anglo-sphere, you see more of the York Rite, where they try to posit that they're more conservative and morally just because of their supposed Christian stance. And here I'll kind of outline why that doesn't really make sense and why I feel as though it's an obfuscation of their true intention. And maybe in the third part of this, I'll get into the fact that it could be just more of a LARP in the sense that they're just fraternal for the sake of fraternizing, rather than actually being more political, like, say, the Scottish Rite, who maybe were more prominent in the French Revolution, etc., or other revolutions. And I also looked up, or kind of saw why some Masons wear the fez, and there seems to be a Turkish or Moroccan origin in their attire. And the Shriners actually are somewhat linked to Masons, or could be said that they are part of their constellation because they're a fraternity and they're entrepreneurial. But it seems like they're a less serious sect of Freemasonry, and maybe not all the way integrated in that constellation. In addition, there is some overlap with other rites that I might get into later, but it's still something I'm drawing out to see where the factionalism lies in terms of Masonry. But it seems like the York Rite might be lying more than the Scottish Rite, because the Scottish Rite seems to have more of a hardline stance in where they state their intentions are, that anti-clerical republicanism or secular republicanism. In addition, their ambitions to sustain or attain a parliamentarian government in all these theaters is very important, because their antithesis is the church state, who declares one truth, which law and education proceeds from, and that is incompatible with their secular republicanism. I've heard Masons say it is allegorical, all these bizarre rituals that they do, such as the hand tools, all this iconography, and it's said that it's all allegory or metaphorical or symbolic, and they say that it symbolizes a higher enlightenment in terms of morality. And that's where I would disagree. I think it's more symbolic in this left-hand path, right-hand path duality. And I believe, and they posit that they are humanists who believe you can improve morally divorced from clerical mediation. And that is also more substantiation to why it is completely incompatible with true Christianity, the Catholic Church, or Rome's sanction. So that is a big component of why Christianity is incompatible with Freemasonry. So whenever York Rites try to pose that this is the case, that there is a synergy between them, I disagree. I completely disagree with that point. There's no real humanism divorced from Catholicism and the sacraments, because Rome believed that there were self-salvationists, I guess, and this alignment to all forms of anti-clericalism is why these Masonic revolutions are seen. Ironically, we don't see this Masonic revolutionary spirit exported to non-European countries, and what came to mind is you don't see that same fervent energy in the Middle East or other parts, and you could argue why that is, but even look through as I said, in differentist lens, my thesis is that wherever Freemasonry is and they have a political foothold, Christianity is removed, and I think it's deeper than them just stating that it's for political reasons. And their centrist claims, they claim it's just for the sake of freedom, right? The freedom of expression of religion, the freedom to practice your liberty of religion. And I feel Freemasons hide, and Rome has shied away from the fact that it has to be declared by the state. Their theological stance, it can only solely be one creed in terms of theology. Christianity at its core is a theologically exclusionary essence. Also hidden is their left-hand path secret. The irony is that they are willing to disclose publicly their membership's religious indifferentism, but that in and of itself is a declaration within the Christian binary. So what I'm saying here is that because their nature is their members are allowed to have religious indifferentism, meaning if a member chooses to be a Buddhist and everybody else is, say, a Muslim or something, that cannot interfere with their membership. And that in and of itself is a stance upon the Christian framework. Freemasons' adjacent banner of republicanism and liberalism is completely incompatible with Christians, and that's my final stance on that. I really do think that because they obfuscate it completely, they're not disclosing their true intention within the two options that you get. You're either left-hand path or right-hand path, and this whole front is to make people choose one, whether they realize it or not. Whether they're cognizant of it or not, you're choosing one. So let's say someone's more naive about the whole thing, and they're kind of skeptical on what Freemasonry is, and they're thinking, should I choose this thing? Oh, well, they say that it's they have to sell it, right? They say we're not a Christian organization. We're not a Christian organization solely, so therefore we are not biased, right? Biased to choose the Christians. And one is likely to think, well, this seems very fair, and that in and of itself is picking the left-hand path, which is what I believe is their true intention, as I said. So that's basically what I wanted to posit on that. I got a little bit more granular on the different factions of Freemasonry, because they are a constellation of organizations that all uphold the Freemasonic banner. So it is kind of confusing in that sense. It's not like Rome, which is one institution solely. And I think that's an important thing to point out. And that's what I want to say on that. I did have a lot of gaps in this because I did write down a lot of notes to cover, and there's a lot of big words in there. You know, in my IQ, I'm a flat earther, so you know, it's not too easy for my prefrontal cortex flat earth brain. You know, but I hope you enjoyed my little delineation I made in the Freemasonic binary that they kind of obfuscate for the commoner or uninitiated. And I hope you enjoyed this because there's a part 3 coming, and I'm gonna talk even more in depth about their different rights. And it's fascinating stuff because they won. I mean, we don't have Catholic monarchies, unfortunately. We have a classical liberal order in the world and this democratic thing, so we got to deal with it. So they're not as prominent as other centuries, but as they were in other centuries. But you know, I think it's important to still talk about this because there is that spirit that is sustained with Freemasonry. With the, you know, we could even say that because there is liberal governments that Freemasonry is alive and well in some sense. Yeah.